Our text is from Genesis chapter 24. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking. Last week we began a 5-week series on practicing kindness. Last week we discussed the story of Rahab and the spies in Jericho. We discussed the golden rule and how wisdom and kindness really are the heart of what religion is all about. And this week, then, we look at the question of where kindness comes from. What motivates kindness in our lives? Because after all, not everyone is kind, not everyone is wise, and we know that apparently kind behavior can be hypocritical, and it can even be harmful if it's misdirected. Motivation is a huge part of what makes kindness kind. So today's Valentine's Day. Tomorrow is President's Day. And both of these occasions offer their own ways to practice kindness, to think about kindness, and to think about the motivations or inspirations behind it. The story of Rebecca at the well is an ideal illustration about what it is that inspires kindness. It isn't really a Valentine's Day story, unlike the very romantic story of Jacob and Rachel, who met at that same well many years later. But nevertheless, this story gets at a key ingredient of happy relationships and happy marriages. So this story places Rebecca in a situation where she is free to make choices about what it is she's going to do. She makes the choice that seems to show that she is inspired by nothing other than genuine kindness, and that she is therefore a perfect wife for Isaac. In the story, she is literally the answer to Abraham's servant's prayer. So Abraham's servant had been sent from Hebron in the land of Canaan to the city of Nahor in Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac. And upon his arrival at the well in Nahor, he prayed, "Let it be that the young woman to whom I say, 'Please, let down your pitcher that I may drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I will also give your camels a drink,' let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac." So Rebekah then is faced with a stranger who is making a request for a drink. She is under no obligation to help him, although the rules of hospitality that prevailed at the time made it almost unthinkable that she would refuse him. But she shows what kind of person she is when she goes beyond what he has asked for and offers to water the camels as well. And this is no small offer. There are 10 camels, and a thirsty camel can drink more than 30 gallons in a very short amount of time. It would have taken her a long time and considerable effort to draw up that much water from the well. So if that willingness to go out of her way was a test of her sincerity, she passed it with flying colors. It's a common device in many traditional stories that men trying to win a bride will be challenged with tasks that show their worthiness and their sincerity. For example, in Greek mythology, King Pelias gave a task to the suitors of his beautiful daughter Alcestis. And the task was this. He said she would marry the one who could yoke a lion and a boar to a chariot. Surely an impossible task. But Admetus, king of Thessaly, was able to do it, and he was the winner, but only because the god Apollo tamed the beasts and harness them for him. In a similar example, Icarius of Sparta made the many suitors of his daughter Penelope run a foot race to decide between them. And the famous Odysseus won that race, and Penelope became one of the most famously devoted wives in all of Greek mythology. Similarly, the writings comment on how doing difficult things for someone else's sake has an effect on your relationship with them. We read in True Christianity, take, for example, a young man and the young woman he hopes to marry. When he confronts people who are destroying her reputation, surely he becomes more united to her. What about when he is injured, fighting a rival? It's a law inscribed on nature that under these circumstances, the couple will become more deeply united. In the same way, doing the other person's will is how a friend is united to a friend, a child to a parent, a servant to the head of the household. If the friend, child, and servant defend their superiors against enemies, they are more deeply united to them. If they fight for their honor, they are even more deeply united to them. In other words, the greater the challenge, the stronger the motivation needs to be to face that challenge, and the more clearly it often reveals what it is that's inspiring the action. The result can be a stronger union when the challenge is met, and this is the promise behind Rebekah's kindness to Abraham's servant. So why does she do it? It seems that she is doing it simply because it is the right thing to do, because she is a kind person, because she cares about his welfare, even though she knows nothing about him. It might be different if she had known who he was, and maybe even more different if she had known what was about to happen. Now, in the work Spiritual Experiences, we read about the way that children are raised in heaven. There's specifically a story about little girls, showing that kindness can be inspired by external rewards. These girls, when they're growing up in heaven, these are children who have died and gone to heaven, they are given beautiful clothes and they're given beautiful gardens for their very own. And notice what it says about how they are taught by rewards and consequences. It says, when they see spots on their clothing, it is a sign that they have had an evil thought and have done something that should not be done. And the spots cannot be wiped off as they can from clothing in the world. If they then repent from them, the spots disappear of themselves from their clothing. If they see a new garment in their room, they inwardly rejoice because they know that they have behaved well. And when they see the flowers in their little gardens losing color or changing for the worse, they notice. If the flowers change into something better and more beautiful, they're happy because it's a sign they have had proper thoughts. So these kinds of rewards and consequences are apparently appropriate for children in heaven, as are similar things in this world. And it's interesting to think that there are these apparently external rewards for children even in heaven. Now, while it's perfectly normal for children to be motivated by rewards like these, even in heaven, this is not how angels think. Rewards and punishments help to shape behaviors, they encourage habits, but they're a means to an end. As we read in our lesson, the kindness of a regenerate person is inspired by something much deeper. As we read, the pleasure of doing good to their neighbor is their reward. The angels in heaven feel this pleasure. It is a spiritual pleasure that is eternal. It immeasurably surpasses every earthly pleasure. People who have this pleasure do not want to hear about getting credit. They love doing good and they feel joy in it. It depresses them if someone thinks they're doing it to get something in return. So there is a hierarchy of reasons for practicing kindness. We can do it for the best reasons, or we can do it purely for credit, or anywhere in between. And similarly, there's a hierarchy of reasons why we will refrain from doing bad things, good reasons or not so good reasons. And Swedenborg talks about this when he recounts a story of an interaction with people in the spiritual world who were planning something wrong. They wanted to break into people's houses. This is from the Arcana Celestia. He says, "I told them that such things were contrary to heavenly order. But to this they paid no attention. They didn't even understand what I was saying. I went on to ask whether they had no fear of the laws or of punishments according to the law, but these they held in contempt. Only when I said that perhaps they would be severely beaten with sticks by the servants in those houses did they feel any fear." And these kinds of hierarchies are present in every aspect of our lives. And we ourselves are often only vaguely aware of our motives. There's an interesting teaching in the doctrine of charity about ways of discovering what our motives are. It says this: self-examination. 1, if it is only as to the actions, it discovers little, and this is not enough. 2, but if it is as to the thoughts and intentions, it discovers more. And 3, if it searches out what the person regards or does not regard as sins, then it discovers all. For whatever people within themselves regard as allowable, that they do. So it's very important for us to know within ourselves what we actually think is something. No, that's not right at all. That tells a lot about us. So the question that we ask ourselves is whether we think it's allowable to be inspired by things like honor, reputation, and gain. These are motivations that are natural for everybody. Everyone is inspired by honor, reputation, and gain to some extent or to only a little extent. And the question is, as we look inside ourselves, are we content with that? Or would we rather be people for whom kindness is its own reward? Now, this weekend, we honor the service of our national leaders, our presidents. And we are all aware that some leaders are honored more than others for many different reasons. But one reason is the public perception of the nature of their devotion to the office. In a continuation of what we read from True Christianity in our lessons, there's a discussion of those who serve their country purely out of self-interest. We read, "They say they intend the country's well-being and are devoting their lives to it, but if they do not receive promotions and wealth as rewards, they badmouth the country and become allies with its enemies. When they do something good, it's not for the public good, but for the pleasure they take in loving themselves and the world, which they inhale as the only form of good." This same sort of attitude is possible in any line of work. The goal or purpose is the determining factor throughout. And this is why we love leaders who seem to love our country and to love the work of leadership for its own sake. And all of us do tend to do things for the sake of credit. It's very hard to avoid. But in our reading, there was a hopeful comment about this. It's very interesting. It said this: "It's easy for the Lord to erase people's idea that they deserve credit, provided those people attain this love or this goodwill primarily through working justly and faithfully in the position, business, or line of work they are in, and with the people with whom they interact. That is, it seems that the work itself, done justly and faithfully over time, tends to dampen the self-centered motivations that are common to everyone. And the passage goes on to say that it's different with those whose works have been more obviously voluntary, where the idea of credit is harder to escape. If we continually do good works for other people that are purely voluntary and everyone notices how great we are because we're often doing those things, and if that is our attitude about it, it's hard to get around. Instead, things like this we should think of as duty, as people do with their employment. This is our duty. This is our service. This is what we do every day. This is just the ordinary thing to do. These kind of things practiced faithfully over long periods of time create charity, and they minimize our natural thoughts of reward. And something similar happens with romance. Today's Valentine's Day and our Valentine's Day inspiration can be deep or it can be shallow. We give Valentines to all kinds of people. But with true love, as romance blossoms into the intention to marry and moves from there to a long-term, faithful union, loving and kind behavior, the loving and kind behavior that goes on will tend to become more and more sincere and more genuine. And that sincerity is what Rebekah showed in her kind actions towards Abraham's servant at the well. She must have been amazed when he proceeded to give her valuable treasures, and even more later as he unfolded to her family the purpose of his journey. Her kindness was the answer to his prayer. And when the time came for her to make a decision, she willingly returned to Canaan with him. And this is the kind of love that we celebrate as conjugal love. And we honor a similar unselfish devotion to duty tomorrow on President's Day. So that is our message today about what inspires kindness. Next week, we will look at how kindness can support someone else's well-being. And now we close with the account of Rebekah's arrival when she went with the servant and entered the land of Canaan. We read, "And Isaac went out to meditate in the field in the evening. And he lifted his eyes and looked, and there the camels were coming. Then Rebekah lifted her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from her camel, for she had said to the servant, 'Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?' The servant said, 'It is my master.' So she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her." Amen.